I've had that brief introduction, but I've been in the hospitality industry in Melbourne now for 50 years, and I've owned this company for the last 30 years. And we specialise in turning small businesses into properly structured companies, or setting up businesses to operate in multiple locations. So we would deal with probably a couple of hundred businesses a year in consulting, and about 1,500 students through short courses at our training college. And the reason I'm saying that is it gives us a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the industry across the board, apart from the fact that we operate our own restaurants. So Shane, if you want to hit it.
Absolutely. Let's make sure this works.
Okay, I'm entitling this a bad year for optimists, because that's what it seems to be right across the hospitality industry. And it's a peculiar industry that has some major challenges for recovery. So what I'm going to do is explain to you what we're seeing at the moment and what we think may help or assist, and where you may be able to help us. Next slide, please, Shane. Okay, now you're pretty aware of the government restrictions that are going on now, but I need to expand a little bit. In March, they really closed down the hospitality industry, and that required a huge expense in itself. There was the disposal of a huge amount of stock, usually at fire sale prices, etc. And the whole place had to be really closed down, and the staff had to be dealt with. And that's probably a little bit more complex than what you might realise. Just in the restaurants we operate, we had 35 foreign visa holders working for us who were left with no government support and no way to get home. So the government restrictions really have added to our costs in we've had to support these people, feed them, get them couch surfing all over Melbourne. So the restrictions have not only affected the public and the businesses themselves, but a huge number of other people. Now, when the government relaxed restrictions a little while back and started to allow people into restaurants, that was a double-edged sword, because the number of people they allowed into restaurants really meant that restaurants operated below break even. Only a few of the restaurants I deal with were able to actually make more than their costs during that period. And yet they wanted to operate in good faith, because they knew that people wanted to still use restaurants, etc. Now they got shut down again. So they've had to dispose of all their staff, etc. Now we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we do know that all of the medical people are suggesting that particularly restaurants, bars and nightclubs are one of the worst places for potential contamination from COVID. So in worst case scenario, this could go on for quite a while with the hospitality industry. Next point, please, Shane. Now we've lost one of our major drivers in the industry, which is tourists. The average international tourist who comes to Australia leaves an average somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000, of which about 50% of that is left in hospitality businesses, hotels, restaurants, etc. So there's a major driver, and looking at it from the opposite direction, a lot of the tourists come here, particularly to Melbourne, because of the food culture, etc. here. So in other words, one drives the other. Our economy is driven by the tourists coming in, and the tourists drive our economy. Foreign students who are fairly thin on the ground at the moment, we're a major class of customer for the takeaway food in the lower down levels of the hospitality industry. So the loss of both the premium consumers and the down market consumers has really created quite a bit of havoc. And we don't see tourism really coming good in Melbourne for a while. We think it'll be quite a while before foreign people are allowed in, and I think that the regional people are going to be very wary of coming to Melbourne for a while. That seems to be their attitude. And the other thing is, with all the offices, etc., that are vacant in the city, we don't have the CBD trade that was the greatest concentration. There were 5,800 restaurants within 15 kilometres of the CBD in Melbourne. We think there's going to be a lot less, and I'll come back to that issue later. Next one, Shane. Now, the big ogre here is accrued debt. particularly rent. Now, when you think about the situation, if the government shuts your business down and then the government publishes a formula for rent, and that formula says that we'll take how much your income is reduced and we'll work out a payment scheme where you pay half now and half later. A lot of the places have had really no income whatsoever, and yet under the government formula, they're required to pay 50% rent over a period of time, which means that when they reopen, they'll be saddled with 150% of their normal rent until they clear the debt. There haven't been any, using a legal term, there's no force majeure clauses or whatever in the commercial leases that they have. And the attitude of a lot of the industry at the moment is, if I've been forced to close down and I am unable to operate because of forces outside my control, why should I have to pay rent because the property is not fit for purpose? So particularly the legal people out there might pay attention to this one. We think there's going to be a lot of activity on people going to VCAT or whatever and arguing about the situation, because otherwise they're going to really be forced to close the doors when they don't have to. Next point, Shane. Now, the loss of staff, a lot of staff didn't get the government support, a lot of the young ones, etc., a lot of the casuals. A lot of staff failed to make the sort of money that they needed or they were used to. A lot have resigned. We think as soon as Australia opens up, there's going to be a mass exodus of all of the visa people who are on working holidays over here back to their own countries. And there's going to be a huge lack of bottom level, particularly casual staff. Now, the problem that the restaurants face is that at a time when they're forced to run with reduced numbers and reduced income, to recruit and train a staff member properly in a restaurant or whatever is going to cost somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 over the first 3 months. And if you had to replace 20 or 30 of those, that's adding a huge burden onto what you're already trying to do. So there's going to be a scramble for staff, and a lot of staff have been, put off by this whole situation and are determined not to come back into the hospitality industry. Next point, Shane. Now, the other problem is that the supply chains are in absolute turmoil. We think a large number of suppliers are going to go out backwards, are not going to be available. We know that the ones who are still trading are carrying huge debt that didn't get paid when this hit, and they're going to have trouble. This is some of the accrued debt that the restaurants owed. So supply chains are going to be quite topsy-turvy for a while. And we don't really know what's going to happen with that, but it's creating some problems already. Next one, Shane. Now, the public have been educated during COVID to do two things. They've been educated to cook at home, and a lot of people have found a newfound interest in cooking. And they've also discovered online ordering. Now, the online situation is going to drive the creation of a load of what we call dark kitchens. And if you don't know what a dark kitchen is a remote location from a normal restaurant site in a cheap, perhaps industrial area where the rental is quite low, where they can produce and do home delivery from there without the severe overhead of a retail rental in a CBD or something. So we're going to find that perhaps a lot of the industry, or not a lot, but a number of the restaurateurs are possibly going to close down their normal restaurants and operate home delivery, etc., purely out of dark kitchens, because they've discovered that it's a lot easier than running a restaurant and it's profitable. So we're finding that the industry is likely to change quite a bit. Next one, Shane. Now, restocking and reopening is the purchase of stock. Typical restaurant, probably $20,000 or $30,000 up front to restock. And then they've got to do a deep clean, which is also very expensive and has to be done by specialist cleaning companies. And they're going to have to come up with the money to do this at a time when they haven't got any money, especially the smaller ones. To paint a proper picture here, Most of the small hospitality businesses around Melbourne were not making much profit before any of this happened. The average profit out of a restaurant was somewhere between 5 and 11%, which is not particularly brilliant. A lot were making a lot less than that. But the notable thing was most of the businesses had no safety money. They didn't have an accrued bank account or whatever for a rainy day. They were running pretty well hand to mouth. And then all of a sudden this happened and there isn't a lot in reserve. So the cost of reopening is going to be something that a lot of them can't afford, particularly on top of the fact that the government support is going to be wound back and they're really going to be left with not a lot of money at all. Next one, Shane. Now, the crystal ball. We estimate that as a result of all this, about 30% of Melbourne hospitality businesses will either not reopen or will not survive next year. We're already seeing the trend across the place. On the other side of this, before COVID started, we also believed that Melbourne was 30% oversubscribed with restaurants and cafes because the industry's been driven for many years now by both property developers who put restaurant and cafe spaces in every building they build, and the media, which has been driving the industry with shows like MasterChef and My Kitchen Rules, etc. So we built to the point where we were really oversubscribed. The competition was so fierce, nobody could put up their prices to where they really needed to. And we think as a result of this economy suddenly taking a downturn that we're going to lose about 30% of them and over about a 12-month period. Next one, Shane. Regionally, we think it's going to be about 20% of hospitality businesses. They're affected severely by tourism. Tourism has declined quite substantially. So I think there's going to be a fair bit of carnage. Next one, Shane. Now, it's the smaller businesses that are going to suffer the most. There's an awful lot of small businesses which are just family businesses, mom and pop businesses or whatever. They've got no real support behind them. And we think that they're not going to be able to sail their way through all this. So there's going to be a lot of misery. Next one, Shane. We're already seeing some of the larger groups. One of the things that we see in the hospitality industry is that hospitality businesses agglomerate in order to reduce their overhead costs. They operate combined marketing and, combined production kitchens, all that sort of thing to reduce their overheads. But they tend to grow beyond their infrastructure, particularly human infrastructure, and a lot of them are on the knife edge at the best of times. And we know that a couple of the operators, a couple of the high profile operators are busily trying to sell very expensive holiday houses, etc., which tells us that some of the larger groups have got pretty wonky at the moment. Next one, Shane. Now, the initiatives that we would like to see, some of them are unlikely, but I was in the industry in 1983 when the government removed tax deductibility for restaurant entertainment for businesses as a marketing cost. It was wonderful. It was the land of the long lunch. Over the 18 months after they removed the tax deductibility, we lost a third of all the restaurants in Australia. So my colleagues and I out there in the industry said, well, if we lost a third, then maybe the government can give us a boost by putting it back, because we feel that this would please both businesses who could go back to using restaurants for marketing entertainment and the hospitality operators themselves. It might not do much for the taxation department. So that's the big one that everyone's pushing for at the moment in the industry. Next one, Shane. The award structure in hospitality is a nightmare. There's about 62 different awards that apply to the hospitality industry. Now, I got my staff a couple of years ago listing all the government departments that have anything to do with this and ringing them and asking them what are the awards that apply to this, this and this. Now, we got totally different answers from every government department that we spoke to. No one seems to know what's going on. And the restaurateurs are saying, well, we can't double our prices on a Sunday, but we have to double our labour costs. And at a time when the industry is really sick, that's killing the industry. And there's a huge push in the industry to say, look, we need some form of flat rate payment system across the industry. Otherwise, carnage. Next one, Shane. Penalty rates. Created by the award structure, but the penalty rates are quite vicious in hospitality. And the thing is, you think about a business that does most of its trade on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So 2 of your prime days of the week, when you're going to do probably 45% of your trade, your labour costs are at least 50% per hour higher than they normally would be. So this is killing the industry as well. Next one. The removal of the government support is terrifying the hospitality industry at the moment. The winding down of it, because we're still shut down, and we're shut down, and they're winding back the JobKeeper support. So we don't think hospitality is going to come out of this for quite a while, and certainly we're forecasting that there's not going to be much happening before February or March, when really the whole government support is removed in total, or at least they're intending to do so. So that's going to mean that what is largely propping up the industry at the moment is going to be disappearing at a time when they're still not trading properly. Next one. This one I put in for my own benefit, is that if you're dealing with hospitality businesses, be kind. They're going to need help, and I know you're not a charity. We're not a charity either, but we're aware that you're going to get people coming to you that are in danger of losing everything or whatever, and they're not going to be very well healed. And I know it's just a sad fact of life, but we're anticipating an avalanche of them. So if you're looking for business opportunities, let's talk about something positive at this stage. There's going to be a lot of move in hospitality real estate. There's going to be a lot of businesses for sale, and unfortunately probably not many buyers around to buy them, etc. But there'll be a fair bit of conveyancing. There'll be a fair bit of insolvency work. There'll be a fair bit of battling with real estate agents. So from the professional services sector, the law sector and accounting, etc., there will be a fair bit of business. So that's pretty much it. The hospitality industry has had better days. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks very much. Yeah, and yeah, one of the industries probably doing it the toughest at the moment in the hospitality industry. It's a good insight for someone that's very experienced in that sector. One of the things that they're going to be dealing with, amongst many other businesses, is having to deal with their taxation debt, which